guys.
So sorry for the delay. I thought if I changed the meeting host in the meeting I just left to somebody else that I would be able to start a second meeting, but apparently you can't do that. I figured that out. So that was going to be my solution, but it didn't work. So
I am so not surprised that you are multitasking and trying to do two meetings at the same time.
just, I ought to have a PhD because I pile it higher and deeper on myself all the time. So, There, okay, I'll keep getting everybody in as we can. But Rob, if you wanted to jump right in, I know we are a couple minutes late getting started, but everybody, this is a great session that I think we're going to have some fantastic discussion on today. This came out of a thought that we had last week that Rob brought up, that we were going to look at strategies for planning for the relatively unknown. So that's sort of what the title of this day in this session turned into being. So Rob, and probably a lot of you have taken a stab at it. And so Rob hopefully has some things to share, and we can discuss and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, we'll hold up for a couple more seconds, see if anyone hops in, but it's good to
Absolutely.
see you all. So my request is if you have headphones in, unless there's dogs in the background or something, feel free to keep your mic off, because one of the things that has been difficult in Zoom meetings, and maybe you found the same, in working with students is not feeling like it's conversational. So the degree to which we can keep background noise out is great, but don't feel like you need to keep your mic off all the time. If you just want to jump in, just do it, especially today, because we're looking at a bunch of material and just sharing our thoughts on it more than anything else. Let me just get a couple of things up here and we'll begin.
We have several more friends joining us, Rob and company. Okay. And if anyone, like always, if you have, if someone's in the middle of presenting or speaking or something and you want to put a question or a statement or whatever in the chat, go right ahead and I'll keep an eye on that too for us so that we can get to those questions and conversation starters as we can.
This is really awesome. So from what I see, we already have 4 different states represented. We got a New Hampshire contingent, our Vermont contingent, and we have our Texas contingent, Mr. Nelson. We have Mr. Young coming in, and Brett, the New Hampshireites. This is awesome. And for those of you who haven't attended any of these meetings, the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get going formally, is please, I'm begging you, make this conversational. This is not a formal presentation in the least. We've all found out, as we already know, that just working together as colleagues and sharing ideas and thoughts is really what's going to help us move forward. So this isn't a right or wrong or do or don't. It's just conversational. So I guess I'll begin. The thought of mine that led to this really twofold concerns that I've heard, and maybe you have heard the same. Maybe you know of some other concerns. The 2 concerns I've had are, number one, we know that it's a reality that some school budgets may get cut. York, I know, isn't even voting on their school budget for another month or 2. And in a time where schools are not getting the funding that they anticipated, they will be in a position where they need to make cuts. A lot of music teachers, I have been hearing on online forums saying, well, if I'm a band director or if I'm a choir director, what will that look like for me? How do I do that? And how do I justify my role to my administration? So that's one thought around the advocacy piece. And the other thought I had was, what can this look like? What have we learned from the last 2 months? What not to do and what can we possibly do? And so it led me to think that this might be a nice time to look ahead to the fall. The last thing I'll say around that is that I think for a lot of people, this is the last conversation they want to have. And maybe some of you on the Zoom are also in that, like, I don't even want to talk about it. I can barely make it through this year, but I'm just curious to see what people have to say, in which case, take it in and just enjoy it. Everyone's all in a different place. So in looking at curriculum for the fall, I'm just passing for my own thoughts, everything through these two lenses. The first is that we have to first connect instruction to students in a way that will work. Forget content. What does that look like? And so the delivery is the non-negotiable. How can we deliver our content in a way that works for kids, independent of what that material is? Does that make sense? Once we've decided how we can deliver effectively what we need to our students and interact with them, whatever that platform is, then what content can we deliver that meets that delivery system? I think to approach it any other way could be helpful, to look at things differently, but unless we're connecting actual instruction to how do we meet students where they are, it might lead to false starts. So I'm going to share in the chat box with you in a second. First of all, as I'm saying all that, do any of those things resonate with people? Do you agree, disagree? Have you heard the same, or is that the first you're hearing of any of that? This is where I come on and say Bueller. Edit, paste.
Yeah, I would say that that's a big thing that's going to be coming up, is how do we have those connections with students, especially like new students who are coming in. Like some students won't even know their regular ed teachers, and if we start in the fall like this, how do we get new band members and continued band practice and so on? So I think connections is very important during this time. And how do we make those new connections via online if students so choose to attend our meetings and so on?
I also believe it's cultural as much as anything else, about how do you build the culture that brings them in the first place. There's no way to start the culture at the beginning of the year if they're not in the room. They don't get to know you. They don't get to know your other students, the seniors that have been there for 4 years and know your culture and know how you've done things and know how your room works. I mean, I think there's a huge gap in being able to continue our culture, the unique culture we provide in a school building that other faculty don't get a chance to do in the same way that we do. That's my biggest fear, is I can't transfer culture anymore. I begin to lose that connection.
And some of the discussions we've had the last couple of months have focused around the fact that we have no control over learning environment now. And that speaks to what you're talking about, Kirk. The idea is that that's outside of our control. We cannot create that environment for our kids. We can Zoom with them, but we can't create that environment. So what does that look like? At York, they're talking about maybe continuing what we've been working on here. And my concern about that is, to whatever degree this has worked for us, true or false, it's worked because we already had that foundational connection in place.
True.
So consequently, developing that foundational piece with our students, regardless of subject area, but I would argue, and so would you, especially in music, is going to be critical. And what does that look like? I have no thoughts or ideas around that other than spending the summer brainstorming about possible ways and approaches. We know we need to build those relationships, but what can that look like? Has anyone else thought about that and maybe thought of some strategies?
Well, I feel like in my situation, at least, that those students who have gone through this year and did get that, who are planning on continuing next year, will be fine. But students like the incoming freshmen or any upperclassmen who are, like, say, joining course for the first time aren't going to have that. I might know who they are, but they're not going to have the same investment in the program. So I'm assuming that most of my students I get back next year are people who I had this year. So I think that I can make it work, but So I think a lot of us we will be retaining students who already have that foundation with you.
1/4 of our student bodies at the high school level will never have been in high school before, much less comfortable with, what we've been doing. Ken, you had your hand up.
My thoughts have been focusing whether or not we're in school or we're out of school. It's still like a lot of my students are grouped into small groups for lessons. So I have small group lessons in addition to large ensembles, rehearsals. And I was thinking that would be the best way to capitalize on getting my students to be together, because I usually try and group them together by friends. And a lot of them are used to doing that because of what was going on before school ended. And then, I'm looking at my students that are coming in, and I have 5th graders and 6th graders. My 5th grade students is to just try and contact guidance counselors and try and group the students together so they can kind of support each other, whether we're doing meeting by Zoom or if we're going to be social distancing in a building somewhere. So like chamber groups, thinking chamber groups. That's what I'm thinking. And then looking for chamber music as well.
Just giving space for people to hop in if they have additional thoughts on that.
I just posted on chat, but I'm just wondering, not being in Maine anymore, where is Maine at with their plans for the fall? Because I know our Texas Education Agency has submitted various plans, including going back all virtual for a period of time, only having half the students in the morning, half the students in the afternoon was one plan, changing the yearly schedule to mostly an all-around all year school, and there's 3 or 4 other potential plans. And I know our superintendent actually just emailed everybody this morning saying that we are definitely not wanting to change our schedule, our planned schedule, which we start the very beginning of August and get done the very end of May, typically. So he would like to keep the schedule the same, but they're looking at all options at this point. And he told us that he would not be letting any of us know probably until after July 4th.
You want to take that one, Jason?
Yeah, I can. Again, unfortunately, I can only speak in generalities about it. I know that the Commissioner of Education has a very robust task force that is working diligently right now on what well-articulated, fully encompassing guidance can and will look like for schools. I don't know when that's going to be released. And of course, we have local control throughout the state, so that's precisely what it's going to end up being, is guidance. I know that through conversations that I have picked up from Maine School Management, which covers school leaders and school boards, they're very interested in knowing what the Department of Education's guidance is going to be, which means that hopefully that guidance, when it's well thought out and presented, will be supported by Maine School Management and the MPA and other organizations, so that schools can have some sort of uniformity with it. But I think it is ultimately going to rest with your school leaders when that guidance finally comes out. And again, I don't know. I know that they're working very hard to get guidance out about summer school. And that will be forthcoming, or they've started distributing that right now. And then but I don't know what the timeline is for next school year. I know that they know that sooner rather than later. But that's sort of common sense for us.
Jason, I just got an email today that from the MDOE that Pender Macon is going to make an announcement or a conference next week. There's like a live Zoom meeting or something.
Yeah, there's going to be an update on education. I'm not privy, believe it or not, to what that is. So when I saw that advertised, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. I may need to register for that to see what's going on." So,
I registered as well because I was interested to find out what the update is, but I don't know if anything. It didn't say specifically what it's going to cover.
I'm assuming I'm going to get a briefing on that over the next day or two. So I saved a seat for somebody else to hop in. I can watch the video later. But
I know that whatever guidelines they have already put out in Maine for summer school are so rigid and strict that our school system has already decided that they cannot do summer school at all. I don't know if that's happening other places, but that's where we are.
So I'm going to shift this now to, it's related, but a different direction in that if we don't know what next fall looks like yet, and it might be all together, or it might not be all together, or it might be somewhat, or we don't know. And factoring in the music teachers who are concerned, well, what if my administrator says, well, you can't teach chorus now, so what are you going to do? I've come up with a document that I'm sharing with you right now. And what I would encourage you in the chat is to have you actually click on that and be looking at it as we're talking. I can share it on my screen, but that doesn't translate well to Zoom. And I'm putting this out there as something that you could, with all these docs, if you go in, you can go to File, Copy, and have a copy for your own. And the way I came up with this was simply this. If I told my administrator that I don't teach chorus, I teach music, and chorus is the vehicle through which I teach music, or I'm a band director, but I teach music, then what does that deliverable look like minus the ensemble being all together? And what this link is basically what that could look like minus the students being together. I don't put that out there as this is what we should be doing. If you look at each individual column, it's an attempt to sort of break down things that we can do that are also academically connected. The fact of the matter is that, I want to make sure I get this accurate. ESSA that was passed in 2015, it does list music as a standalone. However, the exact wording is courses, activities, and programming in subjects such as English, reading, language arts, writing, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, foreign language, civics, government, economics, arts, history, geography, computer science, music, career and technical education, health and physical education, and any other subject as determined by the state students need access to. Administrators can get real creative really quickly with what our music programs could be looking like if we don't tell them very concretely, this is what we are doing with our kids academically, this is how we are measuring academic growth, and this is why we are essential in the fall for our students. I'm going to back up 1 second and then take comments, feedback, and thoughts. There is a lot about what we do that transcends the academic. We know that, we value that, our students value that. If we are taking that out of the equation for a moment, and we're talking about advocacy for our essentialness in our schools, then this is a conversation we need to have with our administration saying, this is what we do. So in this document, you could get rid of columns that don't fit. You could add columns that do fit. You could add identifiers or assessment indicators that you feel you can wrap your head around and are manageable for your situation. Going back to what I said earlier, what does your communication with your students look like? Can you adapt something like this for your situation so that you can change this from I'm a band director to I'm a music teacher, and this is what I do whether we're together or not? Thoughts?
I would,
go ahead.
First of all, I'm just gonna take this and copy it and change your name to my name. But I think it does speak to this thing that I've been sort of talking to my district music teachers about as well, is that if we go into your administration and you start talking about how important your class is because of your relationships with your students and how it's a safe space and all of these things, I don't think you're going to get anywhere. If you're not talking academics, then you're dead in the water, I think. I mean, that's because any teacher is going to argue that they make relationships with students and they create a safe space. And so while that stuff is obviously true, this is an absolutely excellent document that I know at least my principal would look at that and say, yeah, I can definitely use that. I can fight for your position using this document.
Matt, if I could, though, I want to just submit to the group for consideration. There's an incredible amount of work going on at the department right now in terms of coming up with resources for trauma-informed instruction and social emotional learning, social emotional character development. And I would submit to you that arts educators, and I'm working with Dr. Maurice Elias through Rutgers University to do a presentation for all of us on SEL, and others, that we stand a really good chance of becoming leaders in our districts because of what we do with that. And it's related, Matt, but not really. But I would just suggest that you all look at that a bit through that, at least sometimes through that lens, and that could just be an extra advocacy point of entry, and on-ramp, I guess.
That's good.
I had discussions with my students this week in regards to how things may look next year, different options. And most of them indicated they want to find a way that they can play together, however that may be. And so I've been researching as much as I can about, finding music for small ensembles, whether it be, and they need to be relatively small, for like by instrument perhaps. I know Music for All thing I went to last week, the Zoom meeting, is working with composers, and composers are working as we speak about coming up with more literature for those kinds of situations. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, whether we're back or not, I'm going to be offering something with some kind of improved technology format so I can offer that with my kids. So we can have ensembles to some degree. It might have to be done multiple times throughout the day. That'll be the challenge, scheduling it. It might have to be in evenings on occasion with some. But that's kind of where my mindset is finding a way for kids to perform together in some type of format. They seem to really, really want that.
If you look at column B6, the one thing in this document I put a bold on is I want to take 2 seconds to mention something that has worked really well because it's given students that connection. And it gets, I think, a little bit to what you're talking about, Pat, and it's not the same thing as an ensemble. But one of the things I've been able to do with a class of mine called Vocal Workshop is I've scheduled students in 10 or 15-minute increments, and I schedule them, it's been a small group of like 15 kids, and I schedule them every 8 days. And in those 8 days, they are to submit on Google Classroom a video of them singing whatever song we're working on. And this has been a song of their choice. It can be whatever, but they present a video, and then during our designated time, I share my screen, we watch the video together, and we're talking about how they did, and we're talking about technique, and we're talking about pedagogy, we're talking about that. And then the homework is, in the next 8 days, upload a video having upped the ante a little bit and worked on those techniques, and we keep doing that. I envision for myself perhaps that opportunity for even my larger groups, and instead of meeting every 8 days, we're meeting every 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. But then over the course of the first semester, I've met with every single individual kid 3 times even, mm-hmm. more than that if I have fewer students, individually, and I can actually document their growth, whether as an instrumentalist or a vocalist, and we can talk very concretely about specific things that they've been able to work on, separate and aside from what we're doing as a class. Pat, you're talking about utilizing the technology to bring groups together. I think that's the holy grail for every one of us, and the degree to which we can get there, we need to pursue. I just want to make sure in the event that any of us can't get there, that there's some other person-to-person interaction with students that causes them to feel like they're growing.
That's kind of where I've been at now. I've been using the KV audition etudes, and I've got the collection of all of them. And my kids have been using those. I've created files for them to have access to them. And they've been performing those and sending it to me. And I've given them, I like the idea of doing video sessions with them. I've been giving them comments just through Google Classroom. And I've had a few kids come one-on-one just because they need extra help. But I like the video thing you're doing. I think certainly that would be the next step for me, is to not just give them the comment, but sit down with them and discuss what they've done. Yeah, I like that.
Well, and something that you said a few weeks ago during this time resonated with me, where you were saying that the students were giving you feedback, how much it meant to them to have that opportunity.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also a matter of giving them choices. You know, that's one element I'm having them work on, is etudes, but there could be jazz all-state auditions, there could be all-state music. It's pretty much whatever they want. And they'd like to have the choice, you know, about, it's not dictated exactly what they have to do, as long as it's reasonable. They're doing, some kids are composing their own little ideas, you know, they're making up their own melody. Great. As long as they're engaging somehow and they're doing something and they're exhibiting some type of growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I don't know if anyone else here teaches middle school chorus. And so maybe it's just my kids and not something with yours, but I'm finding that developmentally I'm having a tough time getting my kids to be willing to sing by themselves at home, to make any sort of video. I gave them a pretty fun assignment, and out of 249 chorus students, 25 were able to turn it in. Wow. And, you know, were we singing in a mass choir, they would all be doing great and giving it full effort for the most part, but they've really struggled, and they've been pretty honest with their feelings. And I've talked with my principal about it. And so I'm just struggling how to move middle school chorus forward next year with singing when students are unwilling to sing at home.
It's the same for the high school too, because
that same difficulty for high school. So
right. So yeah, and I think that some kids are afraid to sing at home in front of, you know, so anybody in their family can hear them.
Yeah.
And then I worry about the new students that are coming in that are like, wait a minute, now I have to sing alone and I don't even know how to look at the score. I don't even know what any of this means. Now you want me to sing alone in my house where people can hear me, and I worry about keeping those kids as well.
That's what I was getting at with our, you know, your kids that we had this year will probably be fine, but those new kids who have never taken chorus before are going to be, it's going to be tough.
But yeah, even the kids we have.
Some of you have already heard this, and I apologize if you heard the story, but my meltdown came a week and a half into this, and I was in a Zoom meeting just bawling in front of my assistant principal saying, I need your blessing not to ask my chorus students to sing anymore. And she said, duh, you know, of course. But then it became the journey that led to this document and a lot of thinking around. So for those who can and are able to, how do we support them? For those who cannot or are not comfortable, how do we support them? And what that looks like may be very different. And in the document, I could envision a scenario by which my chorus students might choose two of those columns, and that's going to be their curriculum. And maybe I come up with options for those kids. This is quote unquote, it's chorus, but no, it's music, and it's music curriculum, and it might involve your singing. You know what, for this semester of chorus, you might not be singing. And especially those new ones, I can imagine, Maddie, a freshman coming into my course who took general music in 8th grade and didn't sing in chorus. My students I get from Jen are outrageous, but she didn't meet with all of them. You know, what am I going to possibly do for them? So maybe some of these columns are perfect for some of the kids, maybe some are not. Maybe, Kim, you're giving those students opportunities to sing, and for those that don't, they have alternative ways of developing their own musicianship, and maybe that's through critique or one of those other columns.
And the other thing too is that I have a lot of students that wouldn't do the assignments that I was giving with learning tracks, and I hate karaoke, but as soon as I said, you know what, turn into karaoke, I had a ton of kids that had turned in nothing that loved that. I mean, I feel like I'm not teaching anything, but the kids that weren't turning in anything loved that. So it was something. It's the only thing I got from them. somehow they feel more brave, I guess. I don't know.
Sometimes it's the little wins.
It's what it felt like. I'm like, something.
And in the vocal workshop, 100% of those kids were singing pop and Broadway stuff. And it was wonderful because within that context, when we did meet every 8 days or, whatever it was, 9 days, we watched the video and we talked about the same techniques that we talk about in chorus. We talk about placement, which is going to be different as a soloist, but that's all right. We're talking about placement. We're talking about breathing. We're talking about production. We're talking about tension in the jaw and the neck. The song and the music that they're singing at this point almost becomes irrelevant because we're not working towards a concert. We're talking towards engagement. And man, if 100% of my kids are singing Billie Eilish, but I'm getting them all to sing, that's a win.
And if they won't sing, we have to use other options.
Of course.
Which, again, we feel like we're not doing our job when we're not doing ensemble work, but there aren't going to be a lot of options.
Heidi, you're mentioning choices, auditions, lessons versus theory-based, and I love it. What are options for students that they can say, this works for me?
Well, and
go ahead.
Things that just increase or improve their own musicianship so that when they are able to come back, they have improved in some way.
I have thought that this process, if there's a silver lining, it's that thanks to Aaron Lowell's website. The kids are going to come back with. They've been working on more other literacy things than we were able to get through in a class sometimes. So I think, and again, those who have been submitting videos and recordings are just getting more and more comfortable singing on recordings and videos. So they're getting better. And those kids who struggle, those newer singers who are not really independent singers, we're getting better. They're still, of course, for me, I don't know about you, but any submission I get from my kid is 100 for grade group right now, not next year, but so they're showing progress and they're getting stuff done, and so it does get better.
Other thoughts?
Well, it was interesting. I was just typing on the chat right when Matt said Aaron Lowell's sight reading system, and I was wondering if people used it and if it worked for anybody during this virtual season.
It was, for me, it was, we had like 10 levels of videos and quizzes. So each week it was like a new level. And then in addition, for each level, there were 20 examples, 20 rhythmic examples and 20 melodic examples. So they did one rhythmic, one melodic each week, and they just progressed by level every week. And even if, for the younger singers, they didn't go through 8 levels of singing, but they went through 6 or 7 level quizzes. So at least literacy-wise, they're progressing a new level every week, even if they need to kind of do the same level multiple weeks.
Are there examples, Matt? I haven't looked at Aaron's site yet. Are there examples on that would be appropriate for middle schoolers?
Oh yeah, it starts at level 1, like do to so, all steps. I highly recommend you all look into it. It's a big improvement from her old practice.
Is that available online, Matt? Is that an online resource?
Yeah, they have accounts. And
Jason just put it in the chat box so you can.
I just put the link in the chat box for everybody.
Hold on though, that's well, I guess it's fine now because there used to be like a different addition to the address, but I think she updated it to it's all set.
This one's correct.
Mentally, if you get hold of Jen Cole Ford, I'm sure you'd be happy to share those KV audition A2. It's some for junior and for senior. For my freshmen, they're playing the junior ones, and that's totally fine. And I would have them sight read it the first time, and then the next week they play the first half, next week the second half, and then it was kind of a building process to go through. They felt connected when they wanted. So incrementally, that's a good choice.
There's a buzzing sound. I don't know where it's coming from.
Sounds like somebody's printing a document.
Oh, it just stopped.
Busted.
stopped.
I
So,
thought mowing the lawn, maybe, you know.
yeah.
I like a lawnmower. Yeah.
I thought someone was making a milkshake or something.
That's what I said.
Pat, can you just quickly repeat what you just said?
Yeah, Jen Cole Fortin was just very generous in sharing with me the KV audition etudes, and there's 2 levels, the junior and the senior. And there's 4 years worth of them. So there's quite a few, and they're for every instrument. And then for percussion, I found some other etudes for them, some solo etudes for them to work on. Just some basic rudimental stuff and some things to develop their basic technique.
What were those, Pat?
The KV audition etudes, and the percussion one, I can get the link and share it at some point. But the percussion one was a book that was digitally put online. I just did some research and did some things for ensemble stuff, and I came up with a few things for each instrument, like woodwind materials, brass materials, and there's quite a few things out there that kids can gain access to by just showing them the link to go to. So yeah, that's also a way, like for example, for my brass players, there was things on working on flexibility exercises, and there was a link that they could get to work on that. And for the woodwinds, there were some long tone exercises for them to work on. So, there's some practical stuff for the kids to do. And I think I might have posted those a while back, maybe on this site or maybe with you, Jason, perhaps. I'm not sure if I gave you those, but just a number of things for instrumentalists that they can, get to for different resources. And there's YouTube things for the jazz kids to work on various, standards, and they're keyed for B flat, C instruments, E flat, and bass clef instruments. There's a lead sheet and a great accompaniment for them to play with. So that there are, more things than I might have thought. I'm glad I actually took the time to get to know all these resources, because I'm going to leave them right there for the kids to use. Even if when we get back together, it's still a great resource for them to use, no matter what.
So Pat, you did share those with me, and I put them in that Google Classroom that we set up in March for everybody that's still alive and kicking. But I just want to let you know, over the summer, that all that stuff on that Google Classroom is going to transition more to a permanent home through the DOE portal. And I'm going to be looking for some of you to hopefully serve as some vetting people for some of these resources out there that you can do. I mean, it's a very low engagement commitment level on that, but just as we have more resources that become available for people to get your take on it, being in the field and using it, practicality of things and making them available to other people will be helpful to me, so that I can keep a running list going for everybody to use going forward. And also, for what it's worth, because it's still sort of on the technology vein a little bit, I put in the chat box, but then I forgot to finish my idea because I wanted to make sure I got the link right. Michelle Snow and Victoria Stubbs, our colleagues in Portland, are going to be leading a PD discussion, which I think is going to be an initial session. I think it's probably going to develop into more on virtual ensembles based on the work that they did. And it's probably going to, I think the first discussion is going to revolve a lot around the philosophy behind that, because we have varying feelings about what they are and what they aren't, what they can do and what they shouldn't do. And then hopefully from there, those that are interested in knowing more, we can develop that into a short series. But there is a link to register for that. That's going to be next Tuesday at 2:00 in the afternoon, if you want to join us for that, just to see what their thoughts were on virtual ensembles and how their thought process evolved through it.
Has anybody discussed yet what technology you would use to attain a successful, I mean, Zoom is not really a way to do it, but if there's anybody out there doing that, what are you using?
Well, and that, Pat, I mean, obviously everybody will chime in here, but that's something that we're going to discuss on Tuesday. Starting on Tuesday is what's available out there, and then go from there. But if anybody I know, Kathy, you did a little bit of work, right, through creating something with your students.
Yeah, I did. I posted one today. It's just through GarageBand. I didn't do video yet because you have to do both, but I got all individual recordings, and you can crop them and put them together and line them up in GarageBand. So I did that, and the girls are psyched. It's something,
Yeah.
but
Thanks.
Someone's got a bad cold. One of the questions I wanted to ask if we had time is on the document, the far right column is composition. One of my aha moments during this last 2.5 months was discovering what many people already were familiar with, but I wasn't, and it's the composition program called FLAT. And my theory students, Theory 2 for my kids is generally a composition class anyway. And it's been remarkable what they have been able to come up with based on class parameters that I set for them. And so for funsies, I decided to take a chorus class, and there wasn't an assessment attached to it. I said, here is the link to a thing called FLAT, play in the sandbox and see what you come up with. And I actually got back some really cool things from those kids, which made me think that maybe building that into my ensemble classes in the fall might be a really cool thing, not to dive deep, but maybe give them a chance to do some composing with some really, really light parameters. Have any of you had that experience with your ensembles? I know Dr. Kashub at USM has been very, very big on the composition component for music education. Have any of you had any experiences with that, and what are your thoughts on including that right-hand column for our performance ensembles in the fall?
I'll pop in. I've been using, not FLAT, I've been using Noteflight, but similar purpose.
Yep.
Following with middle school, some really structured worksheets of finish this melody or move the notes around. But it's been cool to see what some of them come up with. I definitely want to use more of it.
And what, have you been doing that with middle school ensembles or general music classes, or both?
Yeah, I've been doing it with both of them.
Awesome.
I just, with my orchestra students, middle school orchestra, I just did sort of an experimental thing, kind of like what you were talking about, Rob, but without the writing component, just giving them a theme and asking them to write a variation, looked at some YouTube videos and some discussion about what a variation is and how it relates to a theme. And then they just do what they can and submit it just for fun. No grade attached, just see what you can do.
And there was some, my suspicion is you found there was some really valuable stuff in there for them to do that, in doing it.
Yeah, they really, I mean, one kid he took the whole thing up an octave. It wasn't that hard, but he had to shift in order to do that. So he learned a new skill and was working on that. So little silver linings.
It's been interesting putting some thoughts together on this document, because in doing so, one of the things that crossed my mind is, how much of this would I be thinking about if I was back in my regular classroom preparing for a concert right now? You know, and so it really begs the question, not what's the value of what we normally do, because we know the value, and this isn't going to be an attempt to change what choirs and bands are, but it really does beg the question, what are we not carving out time to give our kids that they might find valuable? And that, if nothing else, has been a valuable thing for me to think about in looking at the fall. Anyone else looking at specific columns in this document that resonate with you, or you're like, no, I definitely would never go there, and here's why?
I would say that teaching composition for me is the least comfortable thing for me to do. But I like your idea of like, just let them go in there, like you said, play in the sandbox, and they'll probably end up teaching me how to do it. So
They have much less fear about that than we do.
yeah.
I think one of the can of worms that really hasn't been mentioned today, and maybe it's been, you know, throughout all of your discussions prior to today, is how many kids are really sending things in virtually. I mean, I had personally, I teach 6th through 8 choir, and I do have one general music class as well. And out of the 140 something students I have total, I think 75% of the kids submitted at least one assignment, but about 16% of my totals turned in everything. So I'm just wondering, you know, we talk about doing all this stuff virtually, but the elephant in the room is there are just some that can't or
Yeah.
won't. So what do we do for them?
Yeah,
Uh,
the biggest challenge I feel like for
the
kids
other
wasn't the
thing-
technology, it was the lack of executive functioning skills.
And I think that this year it's been particularly hard because it's brand new and because so many schools immediately said, oh my gosh, we don't know what to do. We're just going to freeze grades at the middle of the March period, which is what our school system did. And once the kids knew that, and now the weather started getting nice, they have pretty much checked out because they were kind of given that overarching okay back in March. And so at first it was novelty and they were staying engaged, and that got harder and harder. Whereas I think if we have to start this way in the fall, we'll already have so much more in place, and that will become the expectation and the norm as opposed to this strange thing that we find ourselves in right now. And hopefully at that point, and I'm speaking as one that has had the same thing, today I had my Google Meets for my chorus, and I had half of the kids that I usually have, which is only half of the class. So I had 25%. And band, I sat in my Google Meet for 15 minutes with me, myself, not one came. I said, you know, it's not a college class. How long do I wait to see how late they might show up? So I think if we start with this in place as the expectation that we will have more success than kind of falling into it and finding our way. That's just me. I'm hoping, fingers crossed.
And I don't know.
And my concert is supposed to be tonight.
I don't know how many of you, I mean, I've sent emails to parents and saying, you know, that, you know, this is the work they're missing, but what's most important is that I need to check in and see how they're doing. If they need any help, I'm here, and so on and so forth. Not one email the entire time from parents, students, nothing. So it's like they dropped off the face of the earth. So what do you do with those students and parents who don't care or don't want to or can't? You know, that's the hard part. It's our administration wants us to do progress report / report cards, and it's just comments on what we did from the beginning to mid-March, then from mid-March to the end of the school year, and then give a blurb about how they did virtually. And for they told us, try to make it as positive as you can. No negativity. And how do you make something positive when there's no communication, no work at all, no nothing from parents or students? It's almost impossible. Like, it's my fault. It wasn't engaging enough.
Yesterday in my
What can I do better to engage you?
We had a conversation yesterday in my
I
faculty
think-
meeting based on the lack of parents with executive function, and now that's starting to run into difficulty with us, and that their parents, you know, sometimes parents don't come to their meetings, they don't respond to emails anyway. They didn't respond in the first place, and now that the students are essentially in their house, having to use their executive functioning as assistants, now we have parents that don't that have difficulty there too. So we have grades, we have set, my district has set times for each class in the morning, 8 o'clock, 9, 10, 11, all 4 blocks. Set time. We have a mentoring process, so we have to assign kids that aren't passing. Our last day for seniors is tomorrow. Our last day for 9, 10, 11 is next Friday. So we're right up against the fact that there's so much work that hasn't been passed in yet, that we have a difficult time getting a hold of the parents. Forget about the kids. I mean, that's another whole issue.
I'm going to put this out there as something that we need to seriously think about in this as music educators, and I think the truth is for art educators as well, is that we need to be very specific and thoughtful about what we're giving our students for expectations that can be achievable. And to go back to what some of the conversation was earlier, if we know there are some students who are not comfortable in their home singing, then requiring those students to sing is just not going to work. So we can set that aside as one example. But if we can then shift everything over to what we're assigning is doable, whatever that looks like in our own schools, where I'm going with this is those discussions that you raised, Jay, have to be discussions with the social studies teachers and our colleagues in math and our colleagues in science. Because if we are aligned with the other core subject areas on what are consequences, it sounds very penalizing, but what are the consequences of non-engagement? No fault, but non-engagement. What are those consequences? And let's link up with the math teachers and the English teachers as to what that looks like. So we're all in it together. And it's not, well, okay, yeah, well, the math gets 100%, but that's math. No, what is this going to look like for all required courses? And my hope is that that dialogue can be happening over the summer prior to school beginning, so we're all on the same page within our own school buildings. Because the problem's real. We know that.
Well, we have a lot of teachers that are checked out too in other disciplines.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're giving the kids this sense of like this distance learning doesn't matter, but come fall, it matters.
Totally.
They've had 5 months off, and now they have to, you know, do
another
work.
thing I'll be saying to our bringing up to our administration too is like if we keep doing distance learning next year, that I think they have to be more heavy-handed with those rogue teachers who are. We have some teachers that are absolutely crushing kids with work this whole time and holding multiple meetings per week. And we're supposed to be doing asynchronous, but they're doing synchronous learning, and they, you know, oh, the principals talk to them, but they're not really like making them change, you know, so that's frustrating.
So everybody, with our 5 minutes remaining, I wanted to thank Rob for submitting that document for review. And I hope that that's of use to all of you. And frankly, you know, I think this was a beginning of a conversation that I think can continue. So I just wanted to make everybody aware, though, in order for me to accommodate some professional development slots for our visual arts colleagues, I needed to move this session for the next 2 weeks. So if everyone's agreeable, if we could just bump an hour and go 3 to 4 instead of 2 to 3, we'll keep the same day. I'll update the invite. The password or the link that you have, if you've registered for this series, the link should still work, even if I change the time. But if it doesn't for some reason, then I'll work it out for you. I'll figure it out. And what I was thinking was if everybody wanted to take Rob's document and adapt it and work on it over the coming week, and then when we come back next week, we can use some breakout rooms and we could do a little bit of group sharing. People could share their screens and say what they've been working on, or we can just assign people to small breakout rooms. And then if we do that, I'll be able to issue you some PD contact hours for that if you're willing to work on that over the next week. So if the 3 to 4 slot next week doesn't work for you, but you want to participate, then I can come up with an alternative for you. But if you want to plan on that, does anyone have any feedback for me on that?
Jason, is it okay if people don't have a chance to work on it, but they commit at 3 o'clock next week to hop on and just let's play with it for a little bit? They can get
sure,
that.
Absolutely. I think it's not going to be something that people will necessarily be able to jump into right away, but I was just thinking if you had the week to at least do some processing in your mind and have a path forward and do some sharing about how it's applicable to you, I think that would be completely fair. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I like to just put it out there that I really enjoy having an email from you saying, hey, this is a reminder, register, and then this link will go out, rather than trying to find links that I have a bazillion links to different meetings and stuff like that my head spins around. So it's a lot easier just to have an email from you saying register for this and you'll get a link and you get an email. But I know
my goal tonight, Josh, is to send out an email that has all of the professional development for everybody, for all arts disciplines from now to the middle of June, with links, and it'll all be in a table format with a description of each session, so you'll know what you can plan for. I'll send that out tonight. Go ahead, Pam.
The other thing that I do is when I register, that you can share it right to your calendar, and then you can have one-stop shopping. It's right in my calendar. I don't have to sieve through all of my emails. I can just click on my calendar link, and it syncs the link right there.
I want to, and we'll disperse in another minute. I just have to emphasize that the point of the document is under no circumstances would it be an expectation that this document is what anyone should do. At most, I would envision adopting maybe 3 columns of it, maybe, you know, whatever it looks like. And it's going to be different columns for every teacher, for every grade level, for every circumstance. And so this is more organizational than it was about content, but it would be great if we could continue to have conversations around what that content might look for. So please feel free to share that for the purpose of all of us continuing this conversation. So, and Jason, once again, thank you for making this happen.
You got it. Thank you all for being here to offer your insight. And I look forward to seeing what everybody's thinking about over the next week or 2 or more. And we'll reconvene next week. Remember, next week's going to be same day, Thursday, but we'll do 3 p.m. start instead of a 2 p.m. start.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Thank you all so much.